School climate data can be used to enhance decision-making at the state, district, and school levels. Traditional outcome measures in Pbis include office discipline referrals, suspensions, expulsions, fidelity measures, and academic achievement. The purpose in including school climate measures is to be able to have a more comprehensive perspective of the school environment and to be able to use it to be able to develop more targeted interventions at the whole school and at the subgroup level. So why are perceptions important? Real or perceived, the way that a student feels about the school is their reality. And so it's important for us to validate that. And it's important for us to seek to get that understanding from a number of different individuals in the schools. So when we talk about collecting school climate data, I'll focus mostly on student data, but it's also important to include personnel data and family perceptions. What we know from the literature is that students who have a more positive perception of school climate tend to have greater academic outcomes, less risk of high school dropout, less engagement in risky behaviors, and higher social-emotional behavioral well-being. Given that link, it's important for us to identify ways to integrate what we've already been doing as best practices within Pbis with this new information or with this new data, especially when we think about the impact of the Every Student Succeeds Act that really puts an emphasis on assessing not only student performance, but also aspects of the student environment that contribute to or inhibit student success. As an example, if as a team you evaluate your office discipline referral data and you identify 7th grade males and 6th grade overall as having the lower perceptions of school climate, we know that we would then want to disaggregate that to potentially modify existing practices. The first step would be to identify and evaluate your fidelity measures. Is what we're implementing being done with fidelity? And if so, then we will begin to look at the types of referrals. What are students being referred for? Are they more subjective behaviors like the 3Ds, disruption, defiance, and disrespect? Or are they fighting or other major offenses? If we then go to the school climate data, we can examine both student and teacher perceptions in this case. One, we want to see, do students perceive the rules as being fair? Do they feel like they can identify an adult that they can talk to? Do they feel safe in school? All of these questions contained within the school climate survey give us a glimpse into different aspects of the school environment that might be having an impact on the students. If we start to dig deeper into the data and we identify that 7th grade Black males have the most negative outcomes or perceptions, then that further allows us to look at their discipline data, especially again if what we're seeing are the 3Ds, which are more subjective in nature, and student perceptions. Perhaps they feel that the rules aren't fair or that there's not an adult that they can talk to. So it allows us to have more targeted interventions for those groups of students. Conversely, if we look at 6th grade and we see overall school climate at the 6th grade level is low, then the interventions or the supports that we set up at that level will be different for 7th grade males and particularly 7th grade Black males. So for example, if overall the perceptions are low, then we go back and look at, have the school-wide expectations been established for all of those students? And what are the ways to do that in a way that students are responsive to, in a way that ensures that teacher and students understand what the expectations are. Through this process, we can better preserve resources and be more equipped to support students. So if we just looked at all data in this one-size-fits-all perspective, we might implement all of our efforts into the whole school, when in fact, there could be students that are functioning really well and students that are struggling. So we can be more selective in the way that we distribute resources. Another important point when considering and assessing school climate data is that we want to get the perceptions of all students. Oftentimes we know most about students who are sent to the office because of office discipline referrals, because of suspensions and so on. So we see kind of the high flyers and talk to them and can get an impression about them and look at their discipline referrals. When using school climate data, it essentially allows us to capture what I call missing voices. So there might be, or there oftentimes are, students in schools who are struggling. Maybe they don't have an adult that they talk to. Maybe they don't feel connected or safe. But because they're not demonstrating externalizing behaviors, they kind of fly under the radar and can be suffering silently. And again, given what we know about the connection between school climate and student performance, it's important to be able to get that perspective. So when we collect data and allow all students to complete that, then we can see where are the consistencies relative to our ODR and fidelity data, but we can also understand the perceptions of students whose voices would otherwise go unheard. In general, school climate should be evaluated from both ends. Where the students feel positive and where do they feel more negative perceptions of school climate? Because from a strengths-based perspective, we want to know what is it that as a school we're doing well? What areas are we strong in? Do students feel safe? Do students feel that the rules are fair? But maybe they don't feel connected to their peers, or maybe they don't feel connected to other adults. So it's important to be able to know strengths and weaknesses, and we often focus on just the negative aspects. But if we know things in the school that are working well at the whole group and subgroup level, then we can make sure to maintain and perhaps scale up those efforts, while also thinking about modifying existing efforts for groups that might need more support. In terms of using school climate surveys or identifying what climate surveys to use, there are a couple things to consider. One, accessibility. Is this data that you can use as a regular part of your meetings? One of the benefits of using Pbis assessments is that it allows you to set the window for the surveys to be administered. It allows you to monitor that. And most importantly, it allows you to have immediate access to your own data whenever you need to. There's no reliance on a third party to have to calculate that for you. Another thing to consider is cost. The surveys offered through Pbis are free. It's important to us to be able to provide a platform by which schools can freely access data that we think is most important to driving decision makings. Another aspect is, what are the questions in the survey and how do they align with the school-wide expectations? How do they map onto, as a school, what your goals are? So it's important to look at those because there might be some areas or some subscales that are more closely aligned to specific interventions that you've identified to support certain groups of students. In terms of collecting data, we generally recommend data to be collected 1 to 2 times a year. The elementary survey is brief, 11 items, and so that, oftentimes is pretty easy. For the secondary survey, we have a short 9-item one, and I think in January, we'll have the comprehensive survey, that's 36 items, that allows us to, again, disaggregate the data. So if we collect it at 1 or 2 points of the year, then again, we can get the pulse of the school and be able to immediately have access to that data, which is different from what has traditionally happened, where we might collect the data in February, but you don't see it until the summertime, making it difficult to make immediate changes. The ultimate goal is for teams to be able to integrate climate data into their evaluation plans and decision-making frameworks. Taken together, school climate data, office discipline referrals, and fidelity data can provide a system of checks and balances where if we see areas based on our traditional outcome measures where students are struggling, we can pair that with how do they perceive the environment and think about ways to merge that gap. And again, the other piece is thinking about how do we strengthen existing efforts that seem to be working. If we don't assess school climate data, if we don't integrate that, then it becomes just another thing that we're asking students and parents and teachers to do. And so unless we're invested in using that data in decision making, then just going through that process is not going to be effective.